Hello, everybody. Good evening. It's good to see you all here. It looks like there are still people rolling in, but we're going to go ahead and get started since it's the top of the hour. So welcome and thank you all for joining the International Relations Council for tonight's Lexicon series on the Latvian language with tonight's featured host, Kristine Vainovska Twidwell. Kristine is the senior manager of the foundation at the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. She calls herself an accidental nonprofit professional who has become an advocate, fundraiser, and steward of philanthropy in Greater Kansas City. Her experience ranges from higher education and direct service nonprofits to membership association, where she helps with managing day-to-day operations and fundraising of the KC Chamber's civic investment vehicle, the KC Chamber Foundation. Kristine also manages women's leadership programming. She grew up in Latvia, Northeastern Europe, and has called Kansas City her second home for over a decade. Lexicon as a series is meant to provide an introduction to a language and provide some basic cultural and historical background. My name is Rachel, and I'm an events intern here at the IRC. For those unfamiliar, the IRC is a nonpartisan, apolitical organization that provides a platform for greater understanding of international topics and how they intersect with the Kansas City community. For the most enjoyable event for all involved, please mute yourself if you are not speaking. If you choose to enable your video, which we hope you will do, please make sure you are in a well-lit area free from distractions. You can enable and disable those features in the bottom left corner of your screen. We will be recording today's event and broadcasting live on Facebook. So if you'd like to review this conversation at a later date or share it with someone you think might enjoy it, feel free to visit our YouTube or Facebook page. If you are not comfortable being recorded, simply keep your microphone and camera off. If you would like to connect with us at the IRC, please feel free to log on to our website, irckc.org, which will also be available in the chat box. We encourage you to check it out if you are interested in joining as a member, receiving our newsletter, or exploring other upcoming events. Thank you again for joining us, and now let's get started and turn it over to our host, Kristine.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thank you, Evan, and thank you, IRC, for letting me be a part of tonight's discussion. I'm really excited. I have to give a brief disclaimer. I have never done this before, so hopefully I'm able to do the absolute justice to my native language of just a brief introduction and also just a little bit of a overview about the country of Latvia. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Here we are. Perfect. So tonight we're going to have a brief introduction to Latvian. So as Rachel mentioned, my name is Kristine Vainovska Twidwell. Kristine or Kristine would be how you say it in Latvian. I am a native speaker of Latvian. I have lived in Kansas City region for the last 14 years. And Latvia is a small country in the Baltic region in Northeastern Europe. And particularly in Latvia, I am from Cēsis, which to me is a relatively big town, but it's about 35,000 people. It's located about an hour northeast of the capital. And then I have a fun fact about me. I have relatively no accent. I know some people say it's very light, or it sounds like I'm from the Midwest. I don't really have a great explanation for it. I did not grow up in the United States. I, like I said, have lived here for the last 14 years. Started learning English when I was about 6. Actually failed English in 6th and 7th grade. Didn't quite fail, but I didn't do very well. And so I am a language learner. There's still every now and then a few things that come out that I say that are a little bit different. So if you'd like to hear what an English person or a person speaking English with a Latvian accent would sound like, feel free to YouTube Latvian speaking English. You'll probably get a little bit of a better sense of the accent. The only explanation that I have is I'm a phonetic learner, so I pronounce things the way I hear them. So I just sound like a Midwesterner. That's my little fun fact. So we're going to jump right in. So a few facts about Latvia. As I mentioned, Latvia is a small country in Europe. Specifically, it's in the northeastern part of Europe. A lot of times you will hear people from this part of the world refer to that geographic region either in relation to Russia or in relation to the rest of Europe. So we are just across the sea from Sweden and Finland, and right neighbored by other Baltic states, which is Estonia, Lithuania, and the other countries that we border are Russia and Ukraine. And so Republic of Latvia was established in November 1918. However, this region has been very active, and people that have lived in this area, or now known as the Balts, have been noted back as early as 6th century. So it's a very rich history, a lot of really great heritage. So we are really proud to say that kind of we descend from the Baltic people, or the Balts. And that goes beyond having our independence established just over 100 years ago. As I mentioned, we're one of 3 Baltic states, the other being Lithuania and Estonia, and we are a member of the EU. We have our currency as the euro. That's relatively recent. It happened in 2010s, and then our population is about 1.9 million people. We are a democratic, unitary, parliamentary republic, and our flag is actually one of the oldest in the world, which is another fun fact. So it's chronicled around 1279. As you can see, it's that maroon, white, and maroon. Even more fun fact is that the city that I come from, which is Cesis, the legend says the flag actually came from that region, specifically that city, as it was another great war that was defending the freedom, and it was an honorable warrior that was injured, placed on a white sheet, and unfortunately he died, and from his blood and his honor, the flag was waved, and that was the first recollection of that becoming the Latvian flag. Essentially blood, and the maroon symbolizing his blood, and then the white stripe where he lays. Supposedly, it's also a pretty similar tale to the Austrian flag. So take it for what that is. And then also the Christmas tree tradition comes from Latvia, sort of. So historians have an active debate on where the first Christmas tree was recorded. There have been some discovery that the first Christmas tree and Christmas ornament was found in the Baltic region, whether that's Latvia or Estonia. That's been a rivalry within those 2 countries, but then there's some debate about that not being the case at all. So we like to claim it. We have a whole mark for it in the old Riga capital, where it states that Christmas tree comes from Latvia. So we like to take that claim. And then a little bit of a history about Latvian language. So Latvian is a branch of the Indo-European language, specifically the Balto-Slavic branch. It is the only one of 2 surviving languages on that Balto-Slavic branch, and then it is related to Old Prussian, which was recorded back around 13th century. It's a very, very old language. So as I mentioned, it's one of 2 surviving Baltic languages. Latvian and Lithuanian are sister languages. It's very similar to Portuguese and Spanish, so where the 2 people can somewhat understand one another, but they're still uniquely distinct and different, where they're not able to quite understand one another. So Lithuanians may be able to understand Latvians a little bit better than Latvians Lithuanians, but you'll see in a little bit how they're similar but also different. In the world, there's about 2 million native speakers, and that includes the country of Latvia and around the world. And first in print, it was noted around mid-16th century. So this is the Latvian alphabet. It is a Latin alphabet. As you might notice, there are some letters that are missing and some letters that are added. So one thing that I'd like to note is in English, as you learn the alphabet, a lot of times you'll have a fun ABCD song that you'll learn. So in a phonetic language like Latvian, we have letters that correspond to the sounds that are in certain words. So for example, you'll see that long A or that sharp C or that soft G. So instead of course, we have fun songs where you can learn the language, and A is associated with apple, so on and so forth. But if you go to recite the alphabet, it sounds a lot more like beatboxing. And that's always really fun for all of my friends to say, recite the alphabet, because it sounds really fun. So if I were to just recite the alphabet, it sounds and so on and so forth. So it really does sound like beatboxing. one thing that I will note is you might notice the absence of certain letters, and those include W, Q, X, and Y. We just don't have them in our language. So that's why the Latvian alphabet does not have those specific letters. So I wanted to share how the importance of those long or soft letters have a really great important and meaning. So sometimes you might have the same exact word, and if you have a long vowel or a missing of the long vowel, it's a completely different word. So for example, casas with the short A is plural for goats. Casas with the long A is wedding. And if you interchange them or mix them up in a sentence as you use them, you might end up with goat wedding. So that's something to really keep note of. So that those, some people call them accent marks. I'm sure there's a much more technical term for these. It's pretty important because the entire meaning of the word can change depending on a long vowel or a soft letter and so on and so forth. Couple of differences I like to point out. So as Rachel said, my last name is Vainovska Twidwell. So first of all, W in Twidwell does not exist in Latvian. So since it's a phonetic language, we change our last names based on the phonetic pronunciation. So when I got married, my husband's American, it became Twidwell. So as you see, the W's are converted to V's, and then it was appropriated to the grammatical gender. Since I'm a female, it ends in A, and then the double L just was nixed and it became one L. So this is actually a copy of my passport. And so this is what it looks like. You see the Kristine is with a long I, but in English, it's just a short I. And then Vainovska is my maiden name, and it indicates that I'm a female based on the ending of the last name. So my brother's last name is different. His last name is Vainovskis. And the A and the American Twidwell was changed completely based on the fact that we are just missing certain letters. So as I mentioned, there are a couple of grammatical genders. So that's that feminine and masculine. Another fun fact, as I mentioned, Latvian and Lithuanian being sister languages, Lithuanian actually, based on your last name, shows the state of marriage. So there's a differentiation between a Mrs. and a Miss in your last name, but that's more specific for Lithuanian and Latvian. We don't have that. So it's just some kind of a something that's unique. While with sister languages, we don't have that in ours. So now I'm probably going to overwhelm you with the basics of Latvian grammar. I'm going to give you a heads up. Latvian is a difficult language to learn, and it is pretty complex. And so this probably, even as I was preparing for this gave myself a bit of a heartache and tried to remember of, wow, how did I learn this back in 4th grade? So it is an inflective language, meaning that words change forms to correspond to the functions of the sentence. So the SVO order is that subject, verb, object order in a sentence. So meaning, if I say a sentence, Kristine is reading a book, subject, Kristine is reading would be the verb lasa, and object grāmatu. So grāmatu is I think the appropriate name is conjugated based on its use in the sentence. So nouns, adjectives, and declinable particles decline into 7 cases. And I'm going to show you that in just a second. And then there are 6 declensions for nouns. So there's also singular and plural, and then they're divided between masculine and feminine. And if I haven't lost you yet, here's what that looks like. So the declensions 1 through 3 are masculine, and then 4 through 6 are feminine. And then here are those 7 cases. So this is the noun boy, and it's a masculine a noun. It ends in an S, and that's how we know it's masculine. And so based on those cases, it corresponds to different questions. So first one would be what boy. The second one would be whom or how. It's kind of interchangeable. So you might even ask, whose bookcase is that? And that would be the boys. Then who does it belong to? The next would be kind of that similar whom or whom. And then fifth one would be with whom. Next would be where. And then the last one is without a question, but rather it's an exclamation. So you are, calling someone's attention. You actually remove that last letter of the word. Again, this is only for the singular nouns, so I know this can be a bit overwhelming, but this is just an example of how those words change depending on how you use them in a sentence. Some other things that I wanted to share is Latvian language has no articles. So this is actually one of the hardest things for Latvians who are learning English, because the placement of a and the is so confusing for us. A lot of times, even today, as I am working or writing especially, I'll catch times where there should have been an a or should have been a the, and I just left it out because to be completely honest with you, I do it based on just the feel of where they should go. I'm sure there's grammatical rules on how they're supposed to be used, but that's how I've come to use them. So instead, we use adjectives to distinguish indefinite and definite nouns. So a beautiful lake is skaists ezers, and then the beautiful lake is skaistais ezers. So that's just something interesting to note. And then verbs are conjugated in 3 classes. So we have that past, present, and future. So if you take the verb to read or lasīt, the past for I, myself, past would be es lasīju, present would be es lasu, and future is es lasīšu. For you, and we have a formal you and an informal you. So for, in this case, informal you, in the past, it's tu lasīji, present tu lasi, and then future tu lasīsi. And he or she in the past is lasīja, present lasa, and then future lasīs. Even though the country is very small and there's only 2 million people in the world that speak the language, we have dialects within our own language, and I'm going to share those in just a second. So I'm going to briefly state just a brief greeting that's pretty similar to what you're about to hear. And I am from this part of the country, so I have that Vidus dialect. So this is kind of the language that you'll hear most commonly. I'm probably biased, but I would say, the cleanest language, if you will, because sometimes in some of the other regions, you'll have unique things that you'll hear in just a second. So that greeting that I'm about to read goes as follows. Labvakar, mani sauc Kristine Vainovska Twidwell, un es esmu no Cēsīm. Novēlu Latvijai saules mūžu un saglabāt tautas identitāti un valodu caur dialektiem, izrunām un dažādību. So now I'd like to share just a brief video where you will hear a couple of the other dialects.
Labvakar! Mani sauc Daira Vēber, un es ir no Piltens. Es runāju lībiskā dialektu Piltens izloksnē. Es Latvijai un latviešu tautai novēlu, lai tā vēl daudz gads saglabā savu nacionālo bagātību, izloksnes un dialekts, jo tieši dialekti veido mūsu nācijas nacionālo identitāti, lai skan ilgi un dikti.
Sveicu visus svētkos, lai katram no mūsu Latvijā saistos vispirms ar savu dzimto vietu, un ja būs stiprs savs novads, stipra arī sava izlūksne, sava valoda, tad būs stipra arī Latvija.
So those were 2 examples of the dialects, and as I mentioned, the first woman spoke in the Lībiskais dialect, which was where you kind of shorten the words and we call it skip the endings of words. And the second lady was speaking in the Augšzemnieku dialects, and that was a little bit more rounder, I would call it rounding of words. So that's something fun that even in such a small country and such a small amount of people speaking the language, we have differences within that as well. So as I mentioned, Latvian and Lithuanian being sister languages. So here's a couple of things that I wanted to point out where there are some words that are completely similar and some words that are totally different. So in Latvian and Lithuanian, hello for both is sveiki. Now, land, for example, in Latvian is zeme and in Lithuanian is žeme. Similar, but a little bit different. Good day, just a relatively formal greeting would be labdien in Latvian and labas dienas in Lithuanian. Road or street is gatve for both. It's just a long vowel on the Lithuanian part that's a little bit different. Now, the word for bread, maize, is completely different in Lithuanian in duona. And same with house. So in Latvian, it's Maya, and then in Lithuanian, it's namas. Although I do have to point out that in Lithuanian, the word nams is another word for a building, but not particularly a house. So there's commonalities there, but you know, the family of names is similar, but the meaning is a little bit different. Now, we do have influence from other languages. As I mentioned, it's a really history-rich area, and there's a lots that have happened. There's lots of parts of the world that have conquered that land, and so we have definitely influence from other languages. So, for example, shrimp is garnele, which is influenced by the German language. Chimney is skorstenis, which is influenced by skorsten in Swedish. To think is domat, which is influenced by domat in Russian. And so some of the words that have been influenced from English are business, designs, and fitness. I'm going to give you a guess on what those words mean. You probably can tell. But those are just a few things. And of course, today as language is developing, there's a lot more words that are being influenced in today's spoken language. Now, I know everybody always asks this, though, so I have to address it. It's not a pleasant topic to talk about, but everyone always is curious about cursing in other languages. So Latvian actually doesn't have curse words. Now, we have words for things like hell or damn, which are, I would classify them as softer curse words, but if you are looking to use curse words in your daily language, if you choose to, we really go to Russian or English. And so those are the languages that we borrow from when we use some colorful language. So there are some bad words, but as far as in that nature, we just don't use those from our own language. So some common phrases that I wanted to share with you today. First one be hello. So as I mentioned earlier, it's sveiki. Really in common language, we say ciao, and that's borrowed from Italian. And so for friends, my husband even earlier said, I've never heard anybody say sveiki. Most of the time you just say ciao. So as I mentioned, there's a formal you and an informal you. So the next one would be, how are you? So it depends on who you're asking. You would be asking kā tev for informal and kā jums for formal. Thank you is paldies. Please is lūdzu. My name is mani sauc. And then I love you is es tevi mīlu. And then for fun, I wanted to share some tongue twisters. So the first one, it translates to narrow track railroad. And the way that you say all of that is šaursliežu dzelzceļš. Now, that is just two words, and even for many Latvians, this can be hard to say. And the next one is even more fun, which is streb stipri karsta pupa putra lai tu būtu stiprs. And that one goes and translates to slurp the very hot bean porridge so you may be strong. So those are just a little bit fun things to see how the language comes together in a few sentences. And the last one is not a tongue twister, but many people are very confused why we have such a long way to say happy birthday. But we do. So happy birthday is daudz laimes dzimšanas dienā. And then a few notable Latvians that I wanted to share with you. Now, I do have to note that since Latvia is a region that's been around for a long time, a lot of times people or notable people, quote unquote, celebrities will note that they have come from the Latvian region, even though they were born under the Russian Empire or USSR and so on and so forth. So anybody really that was born in the modern day area of Latvia is classified as a notable Latvian. So Mark Rothko, for example, immigrated to the United States. He's a painter, well-known painter. There's his paintings in the Nelson Atkins Museum as well. And he was born in the eastern part of Latvia during Russian Empire. So Mikhail Baryshnikov, a ballet dancer, is a well-known Latvian as well. Mikhail Tal, a chess player. Artūrs Irba is another one that was a pretty prominent person in the US. He's a professional ice hockey player in the 90s and early 2000s. He played for San Jose Sharks, Dallas Stars, Vancouver Canucks, and Carolina Hurricanes. I believe he was even in the All-Star game. And then Edvard Leedskalning built the Coral Castle in Florida. He's a pretty well-known sculptor. Also came here during 20th century. And then Kristaps Porzingis is probably the one that most people know in today's day and age. He is a basketball player, was drafted by the New York Knicks and is currently with the Dallas Mavericks. And then Jacob Davis is actually credited of inventing the modern day jeans. Now that's a really, really old, far back fact, but he was known or stated to have come from Latvian area when he immigrated as well. And with that, I wanted to say thank you all, and I would love to answer any questions you may have, and I hope this has been informational for you.
Yeah, that was great. So if anyone has any questions, I know we already have one in the chat, but you can either unmute yourself or send things in the chat, and we'll make sure that Kristine sees them.
Liels paldies. Ačiū labai.
Laipni lūdzu.
So Kristine, it looks like one of the questions in the chat is, do people who speak the different dialects have trouble understanding each other?
It's a really good question, and yes. So I wouldn't say all the time, but sometimes. So some people that are from the further eastern area, if they have a really thick dialect, they have a harder time understanding it. So I will use myself as an example. There was a TV show that was filmed that's about Latvian history, and there was a prominent character that was from kind of the eastern part of the country, and he spoke in a really thick accent. And without the subtitles, which I was very thankful that they had subtitles for my own language, I wouldn't have understood him because it was so thick. And it was also a little bit of period piece. So there were some words that I didn't quite catch, but still, it was pretty surprising to me that there were parts of my own language that I didn't understand. And then there's words that we use that some parts of the country don't. So again, just recently, I used the word, I told my cousin who was visiting me, and I said, go find such and such item in the drawer. And the word for drawer, what I use is very specific to where I grew up. And for her, it's a word that she knows, but they don't use. And so it was just unique to see how we use in language quite differently.
Yeah, wonderful. We've got another question. How would you recommend someone spend a week in Latvia to get a good mix of cultural and historical experience?
Oh, good question. Honestly, anything you do, get outside of the capital, I think is my biggest recommendation. I think there's so much to see in capital. Riga is obviously beautiful, and there's a lot of history there, but there are so many castles and little Commonwealth areas that were notable throughout the country. I mean, there was like summer castles and winter castles for various princes and kings and duchesses and duchesses of the areas and German descent and so on and so forth. So that would be my biggest thing is definitely plan to venture outside of the capital. Definitely see the seaside. Doesn't matter where. I mean, we're blessed to have sandy beaches pretty much all along the coastline. So anywhere you go will be beautiful. There's still parts of the country that are pretty remote. It's a very foresty place, so get inside of a forest. It's a very green country. So I think that would be a good suggestion as well. And the last thing that I would say is probably go in the summertime. So we are, I dare say, pretty paganistic people, while Christianity is something that has been brought to our culture and our country, and a lot of people claim themselves to be Christian. We do have a lot of people and a lot of heritage in paganistic traditions, and those are still honored today. And so, for example, the sign that you see behind me is from my culture. It symbolizes the tree of life. And so it's a lot of symbolism. It's a lot of honored things through song and dance and heritage in that way. So in summertime specifically, end of June is the summer solstice, and that for us is huge holiday. It lasts minimum of 2 days, and you know, pre-COVID, would find sing and dance festival opportunities to join, and a lot of it is around bonfires and you know, drinking beer and eating cheese, and so it's a really a great way to get yourself immersed in the culture. So going around that time would be also probably a good suggestion to see something different.
So another question. So Latvian uses Latin script. How recent was that established? Because it's surprising with the relation to Cyrillic languages and Prussian. How did it end up with a Latvian script, and whose decision was that?
Oh, that's a good question that I don't know that I have an answer to. As long as I've known, we've had a Latin influenced alphabet. I'm sure somewhere along the history there was that influence. But that's the interesting thing is if you look at the languages in the surrounding area, Latvian and Lithuanian are very unique. And in the sense that they are kind of its own thing. So Estonian is, for example, much closer to Finnish, and then you have Russian, it's completely different. And so it's really interesting to see based on geographically and culturally where it's located, how that's being influenced. So I don't have a clear answer on you for that one. But I would love to find that out myself. So I have to do some more research.
Yeah, makes sense. Another question from the chat. What is the Latvian community like in Kansas City?
Oh, that's a good question. Very small. It's very small. There are a few of us. I would say probably not as active and vibrant as the Lithuanian community. And I have to give props to the Lithuanian community. They have, you know, they had I want to say a school at one point in Strawberry Hills, if I'm saying that correctly, in kind of KCK area. So they have a very active community. Latvians, there's about 10 to 15 of us. We started meeting last, gosh, was it 2018 or 19? And so it's just people that have ended up in Kansas City, you know, for whatever reason, whether that's through sports and in school or for jobs or whatever everyone's story might be. And so we try to just get together and build community and support one another. Some of us travel home more often, some of us not so often. And so it's a really great way to stay connected. It's really wonderful to see when you come together with people that understand your cultural norms that you don't even acknowledge that you practice. And so I think that's been something that has been the biggest takeaway for me personally as we began meeting and as we began just hanging out with one another, is realizing how much I miss those little things that, oh, when we come into each other's house, we don't even ask, we take our shoes off. That's just what we do. And so it doesn't matter if it's snowy, muddy, dry outside. And when you come into someone's home, you just take your shoes off. And so that was something that we automatically did when we started visiting with one another. And it stood out to me so vividly. And just knowing that that's something that in American culture, you don't really do unless, you know, you're asked or the house owner prefers it that way. So it's just really, you know, different things that we do. We try to, you know, celebrate summer solstice, but not in any kind of a way that's comparable to Latvia. You know, we just come together for a barbecue or something like that. So.
All right. Well, another question for you. So you mentioned last names and how they're gendered. Is it more similar to Western cultures where you inherit the same last name as your parents, or is it more similar to those surrounding Cyrillic countries where it changes depending on the name of your parents?
Yeah, it's definitely Western. So you inherit from your parents. And then again, it changes based on the gender. So, if you have a child, then your child takes on the last name. Usually, if you get married, you take on your husband's name. Now, it's really popular right now to conjugate names. And so a lot of times, or I'm not conjugate, I'm sorry, hyphenate. And so a lot of times the child might have a hyphenated last name. And that's something that's newer, definitely newer. But most of the time, it's not like in Russian, for example, you have the, if I say it correctly, it's the Chistvana, which is where you take that father's name and you kind of conjugate it and you go by that, even though your last name is something different.
All right, any other questions before we start wrapping things up? This is your last call. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up then. Thank you so much, Kristine. Super fascinating. I could ask you questions all night about this.
Oh, I'm here.
Yeah.
Keep asking.
But thank you all for coming, and obviously thank our host. Thank you all for participating in the discussion tonight and being here. We appreciate your time and your willingness to join us for this conversation. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please feel free to support the IRC by texting IRC to our Donate to Give phone number, 816-844-6032. This number is also available in the chat box, or will be right before the end. And I'd like to close by putting in a plug for some of our upcoming programs, including the International Career Series on International Architecture at 12 p.m. this Friday. If you're interested in this event or any other IRC programs, we encourage you to check out our website for more information, irckc.org. There you can find a link to our YouTube channel where you'll be able to find a full recording of this conversation in case you'd like to revisit it. Thank you so much for being here once again. Please stay well, and we hope to see you soon.